With me I have Dr. Einat Wilf, a member of the Israeli Parliament who sits on the Foreign Affairs and Defence Committees. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us here on RT. A few weeks before the flotilla came, you warned the Israeli Defence Minister Ehud Barak not to use military force. You said at that time, this has nothing to do with security and the armaments for Hamas are not coming from this flotilla. How then can Israel justify its use of force?
Well, in my view, the flotilla was ultimately an effort. It was a PR effort. It was clearly not a humanitarian effort. If those who conducted it truly cared about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, they had numerous opportunities and were offered numerous opportunities to take whatever they wanted into Gaza through the main entries into Gaza. So this was clearly about sending out a message, about a PR kind of campaign. My argument was that when we're engaged in a campaign over ideas, over images, the last thing we need to do is give the other side exactly what they want, which is an image of conflict with Israeli soldiers. This was clearly what they wanted. They came into this effort seeking that image. So clearly a provocation. The thing is that when you're engaged in that kind of battle, you have to be smarter than the other side and not to give them the images that they seek. So you can justify the use of soldiers, and if you look at it, a very specific effort to kind of go through the blockade, and Israel has a legitimate blockade that is defined by international law as well. But my point was that we are here, we're fighting a war of ideas. And there is an effort, even I would say a coordinated effort, to isolate Israel, to portray it as an illegitimate state. We have to respond in kind, and we have to protect ourselves by intellectual means. And when this is the arena, the use of soldiers is not the best use. I'm not saying that Israel didn't have the right to use them. It has the right. The fact that you have the right to use soldiers doesn't mean that it's necessarily the smartest thing in the service of your cause.
What would have been the alternative?
To let it through. We did it in the past, and it worked brilliantly because you deprive the other side of exactly what they want. They want that image of confrontation. You deprive them of it. The story fizzles. The international media is not interested. Since this is ultimately a PR campaign, you kind of literally you take the wind out of their sails.
By letting the ships through, would that not have delegitimized Israel's blockade on Gaza?
On the contrary, and we let ships 4 times, we let them pass, and nothing happened. Because ultimately it's all about the story, and it's all about the media. And if the media is not interested, it disappears. So you're now kind of backtracking given the interest that the world has in the story as a result of our failure, the fact that we kind of responded to the provocation in a way that was not wise. But had we just let it go through, no one in the media, the story would have fizzled within a day. And if it would have fizzled within a day, no one would have been interested in Israel's blockade a moment later.
Why do you not think that this was, as the organizers of the flotilla say, an attempt to try and challenge Israel's hold on Gaza? Indeed, many in the international community believe this as well.
Oh, because it's never about that. Because if it's not that, then there's something else. And because these organizations, if you look what happens within Turkey, if you look at the suffering of other people around the world, they somehow never show that same passion and caring about suffering in other places in the world. As I said, if they really wanted to bring in humanitarian aid, they had all the opportunities to do so. This was clearly a challenge, and it was a challenge that was focused at something that is ultimately aimed at Israel's ability to protect itself. If you begin to delegitimize that, and someone said very beautifully, you often go to meetings with senior people in Europe and they say, of course Israel has every right to defend itself. It's just that whenever Israel tries to defend itself, it's never the right moment. So that's how you slowly undermine the idea that Israel has the right to defend itself as the homeland of the Jewish people. And every time you just find somewhere else. And if Israel leaves Gaza, which is remarkable, again, Israel left Gaza to the 1967 borders, not a single soldier in Gaza, not a single settlement in Gaza. And yet what do you see? You see the Palestinians and especially Hamas saying, oh, no, 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 you haven't really left. You still occupy us. Because they refuse to assume responsibility. Heaven forbid that they should actually be responsible and build something and give up on this culture of always resisting, always being against. They would actually have to prove themselves. I mean, think of that. So there's a desire to constantly say, oh, you never really left. You still occupy us. You're still responsible. And because you're still responsible, we can sit back and we're not responsible.
So why was Israel's Defense Minister Ehud Barak and the rest of the defense establishment not open to this kind of thinking?
Because if you look at the leadership of Israel today, it was forged through military struggle and it was forged through anti-terrorist struggle. So they are still the outcome of a different arena. The arena that looked at military threats, at terrorist threats, and that got very good at responding to those threats. And it takes a while to understand that the arena has shifted. Also for Israel, it took a while to understand that classic wars have ended and now it's terrorism. It took us a few decades to find the proper response to international and domestic terrorism, to build an export-based economy. So these mental changes actually take time, because once you create those mental structures, it's very hard for you to shift. When I talk about an intellectual attack, it sounds fluffy. It sounds, I mean, for a man who went through the military, this is not a serious attack. What's an intellectual attack?
In your opinion, how is Israel faring in this war of words? Do you think, for example, that Israel gets a fair hearing in the international media?
There's no doubt that whatever happens here gets disproportional attention to anything that happens anywhere else. What I do find that the main problem here is that people rush to judgment. And there's no appreciation for the complexity of the situation, for the complexity of the conflict. And I think, if anything, we should insist on the complexity of things so that people would understand that it's not so simple to rush to judgment in this situation. It's not so simple to decide who's in the right. And I think this is what Israel should really Israel should fight for and battle for. Not that we're right, they're wrong. I don't think that's the way to go. But just to insist that the situation is far more complex than might appear in the first few minutes of watching a video.
The findings of an internal Israeli military probe have been published, and they found that there were problems with the operation, the planning, the execution. But the findings did not actually put the blame on anyone. What kind of value do you think a probe like this has?
This is within the box. No one comes up and says, just a moment, the whole thinking should have been different. The whole thinking should have been that this is not an arena where the military gets sent, because the military doesn't know how to deal with images, with ideas. So in that respect, it's not helpful to the kind of shift that I think Israel should make in order to truly win in this war of ideas.
You've written a book, My Israel, Our Generation. Do you think that the new generation of Israeli leadership, such as yourself, will take this kind of thinking on board?
Yes, certainly. I mean, my generation is the first generation that fought in the first Intifada. It was an Intifada that was marked very much by this battle of ideas and images. So I think we're much more aware of that. We're not aware of a history of military and wars. That's kind of in the books for us, and distant history. So yes, I think hopefully that is some of the change that could take place, but I hope it takes sooner than the time that is required for my generation to get to a position of leadership in the country.
Do you think we're now going to see flotilla after flotilla with the Israeli leadership dealing with it in the same way, so very much the same kind of reaction?
the desire to send ships came from what people perceived as this great success of the first one, right? Everyone wanted a piece of it. When babies in Gaza are named Erdogan, then, the Iranian president wants that too, and someone in Lebanon and Libya too. But once they see the media is no longer interested, it fizzles, it becomes pathetic, then also the interest to do so becomes lower.
Does this not mean that they'll look for more dramatic ways to get attention in the international arena? So in fact, the flotilla could be something small compared to what is going to come.
Well, I think what we also need to understand about this arena is that it's never going to be a one-off victory. Many people kind of told me, okay, we would have let it go, and then what? Always this question of, and then what? And I say, when we go to war, when we fight terrorism, when we build an economy, we don't say, and then what? We understand that this is going to be all the time, and we're going to have to overcome challenges all the time. As soon as we shift our understanding, we understand that this is the key arena where Israel and the Zionist idea is threatened today, then we constantly try to outwit and outsmart the other side. The other side is going to try to do the same to us, and we have to be smarter and better. But it's not going to disappear until ultimately 20, 30 years from now, as with all our other challenges and wars, the other side basically says, okay, they won.
Dr. Einat Wilf, thank you very much for joining us here on RT.
Sure. Thank you. My pleasure.